Hey guys, it's Lou McFly and I'm bringing you another gameplay of Bloodborne. Now this time into the mix I'm going to add a little bit of a discussion, and as probably expected from the title, the discussion is Bloodborne versus Dark Souls. Which one trumps the other? Which one's better? How are they different? Just that sort of stuff. So let's get into it. Okay, so I'm just going to start off with Dark Souls, because I'm a bit of a series veteran. I've played Dark Souls 1, I've played Dark Souls 2. I didn't manage to finish Dark Souls 2, but I got a decent way into it, and you know, did my fair share of monster killing, if you will. Yeah, so Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 1, along with Demon Souls, I guess, a very slow, kind of methodical gameplay. You know, classic short sword shield. You know, you've got your sorcery classes and stuff. But it was a lot more kind of tactical, I guess. In the sense that you had to be very careful, slow, and you had to plan out what you were doing ahead of time. You know, there were of course a lot of random encounters, but you know, it required you to be very careful about your movements and stuff. And that's the same with Bloodborne as well. Just Bloodborne's a little bit faster. Yeah, so Bloodborne is not a Souls game, but it's kind of a Souls game, I guess you could say. But it's different in the fact that it's much faster paced, and I guess there's a lot more variety in the kind of enemies that you go up against and that you face, but it's also a completely different atmosphere as well. It's very dark and gloomy, and at times a little bit scary. I found myself jumping with fright a couple of times when something just happened out of nowhere, but yeah, so that's just that kind of eerie kind of world. But I do have some complaints with Bloodborne. It feels like a lot of the gameplay just, you know, you're rolling, dodging, backstepping, of course, but it all feels a lot like an action game, and it's much more of a hack and slash, and I guess that kind of comes with the change of speed, but at the same time it's kind of a blessing and a curse, you know. So it's much different to the Souls games. Yeah, so in terms of world, I reckon, you know, Bloodborne is definitely better. It has much more variety and stuff, but in terms of core gameplay, I actually think Dark Souls is a much better iteration on the gameplay, and kind of just core movement in the games, in both games. I think, in my opinion, it's more refined, less clunky. Yeah, and the camera angles as well, they get a bit, in Bloodborne, they get a bit like difficult to control. I guess it comes with, you know, most of the bosses are pretty big in size, but you know, it gets a bit clunky, and sometimes in those closed spaces it actually gets really hard to see what you're doing, so it can be a bit of an unnecessary frustration in that the game's already frustrating enough, I guess. You didn't get much of that in Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls, which is a good thing, you know. I really enjoyed that because it kind of made it feel like it wasn't the game's fault for you losing, it was your own fault, and it kind of left you disappointed when you lost in Dark Souls, but kind of determined to come back. But rather in Bloodborne, like, you know, you're losing because in some boss battles because of just dodgy camera angles at sometimes, like not all the time, you know, but sometimes you're losing because of dodgy camera angles, and that's just pretty annoying, you know. So in terms of like camera movement and controls, I reckon Dark Souls definitely comes on top of Bloodborne. In terms of difficulty, I think Dark Souls 1 is probably the hardest Souls game. Maybe Demon Souls. But I think this really actually challenges that in a variety of ways, you know. Because every 10 minutes you'll come across a new enemy type with new moves, new speeds, you know, new different attacks and stuff. Yeah, and it just adds a lot of variety and difficulty to the game. But I think like if you're talking about Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin, I think that's actually probably by virtue actually even harder than Bloodborne and Dark Souls 1. But I think that's just because they added a lot of enemies into the mix with Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin. So it's much different to the PS3, Xbox 360 and PC version of the game, where you have your classic enemy placements and stuff. In Scholar of the First Sin, they either add new enemies through different locations, or they just take out one enemy type and just add a completely new one. You know, so, you know, like an example was in the Blue Cathedral in Dark Souls 2. Instead of having a huge knight guarding the gates to fight the old dragon slayer, you had a dragon, which was pretty crazy. So really, in terms of difficulty, I actually didn't find this as hard as Dark Souls 2 or Dark Souls Scholar of the First Sin rather. But yeah, it definitely challenges them and stuff. But again, it's different kind of gameplay, and it appeals to different players, you know. So I personally prefer the, you know, the difficulty of Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin, just because it's a different kind of difficulty, you know. It has its own different virtues. Now, graphics wise, I think, I mean, obviously, since it's a fairly new game, you know, March 2015, March this year, I think, you know, it's quite obvious that the graphics would be better than its predecessors, but yeah, it's just graphically amazing. You know, all the shades, all the colors are done perfectly, and there's a ton of graphical variety in each world, really, in each level, I guess, whatever you want to call it, land. Yeah, so I reckon if we're I thought this would be a bit of a kind of just an informational video. Not that I'm an expert by any means, but I think, you know, judging by the title of this video, really I should give a definitive answer on which one I prefer, which one I think is better. And personally, I still love the Dark Souls series, and if I could choose between a Bloodborne game and a Dark Souls game, I'd choose a Dark Souls game, just because it's generally set in a different world, kind of different gameplay and stuff. Gameplay that I prefer, and also story that I prefer, storyline. Not that there's much if you don't look into it, but yeah, so it's definitely the Dark Souls series for me. Even though Bloodborne is still a fucking fantastic game. It's amazing, really. Yeah, so if I'm being honest, it's probably my game of the year so far. But in this video, I think the Dark Souls series comes out ahead over Bloodborne, even though it's still a fantastic game. Yeah, it's Dark Souls for me. This has been Lou McFly, and I'll catch you all later.